To all the attendees, your interest and participation in the last session has been a great encouragement to us. We'd like to extend a special welcome to today's honorable speaker, Mr. Subhrajyoti Sen, a Google developer expert. He is currently an Android engineer at KeepTruckin with extensive experience in modern Android development using both Kotlin and Java. Without further ado, I would like to pass the mic to Mr. Sen. Sir, you may kindly proceed.
Thank you for the introduction. As you mentioned, this session will mostly be about navigating between different screens, as well as how you can fetch data from the network and do things like that. So I'll start sharing my screen. There might be some disturbances in my background, so I'll just keep my video off, but I'll start sharing my screen. Okay, I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay, so for the last session, I actually went through what the basics of Kotlin are and how you can start creating some layouts, take some interactions from the user in terms of buttons. For today's session, I'll be going through these code labs, the navigation code lab, as well as connecting to the internet code lab, just to show you how you can go through a code lab on your own as well. Maybe you want to learn different parts of Android after the sessions. So what are the things you can learn and how you can explore code labs? So since today's first topic is about navigation, let's go to the navigation code lab and see what are the topics we'll be learning about. We'll be learning about navigating between two screens, the navigation component. We can leave out the advanced parts of it now, given that would be too much to, I would say, try to learn in one session, because navigation is a very central flow of different apps, and depending on your apps, they can get quite complex. If you would have noticed, apps can have somewhere between 1, 2, 3 screens to sometimes up to maybe 40, 50 screens. It might not seem as much, but like try using all the different pages in the apps that you use. If you think of an app like Instagram, you will see that there's a page where you see a list of all the photos. You have profile pages, you have pages for IGTV, you have pages for Reels, you have messaging. Inside messaging, you can do a bunch of things. You can go live. You can edit your photos. So there is a huge it's a possibility of the number of screens that you can have. Similarly, if you think of apps which you might use like Google Pay, there are a bunch of things. You can add contacts, scan QR codes, check your history. If there are any issues, you can contact support, adding cards, verifying things. So there are a bunch of things that can happen inside an app. And you use different navigation flows to let the user know that you can go from one screen to the other screen. So if you remember yesterday's app, you created an app to wish a happy birthday to your friend, right? Let's take a look at the app. Okay, so here, this is the screen from the app that we created in the last session. And here I told you that we hard coded the name of a friend as well as our name. We even hard code the person's age inside. Let me try increasing the font size. We even hard code the age of a friend to check whether they can drive or not. Now, it'll be difficult if you kept doing this every time that you have to change this app for another friend, and you would have to keep going inside Android Studio, changing values, making a new app to show to your friend. Now, if you wanted to make this reusable, you could easily break it down into two parts. You could have one screen where you give your friends name, you can give your friend's age, and then you can pass it to a new screen where we show the details. So for the navigation code lab, the first code lab is about navigating between two screens. You can skip the introduction parts to most of it. If you go to activities and intents, this code lab uses a new app on its own to show how you can navigate between two screens. We will just reuse the code that we used from the previous project so that it's easier for you to follow along. So one thing you need to know while navigating between one screen to another is something called intents. Now, in this example on the screen, you can see that there are two screens. One is a screen which has letters, which has letters of the alphabet, and a second screen which has words that start with that letter. So here we have two screens, but you can see that there is some relation between the two screens. From the first screen, you click on a certain letter and it goes to the next screen where the next screen knows that you're coming from A. If you had clicked on E, the next screen would show the words that start with E. Now, this is where intents come in. Intent is a way of opening a new screen, in this case, activity, that I want to open this activity to do this. Now you can open an activity without having, I would say, some sort of data passing between them as well. That's completely fine. But in most cases, once you go from one page to another page, you will be passing in data. Maybe think you have an app that lets you browse your favorite movies. You click on a movie, the detail page opens in the next screen. So the detail page needs to know which movie you clicked on. So there's some data being passed between these two screens. And you do that with intents. Now, intents are of two types, as mentioned here, an implicit intent and an explicit intent. Now, if you just think of the words themselves, implicit means it's understood. Explicit means you're specifically telling that I want to go at some place. Now, again, coming to this example on the screen, you go from the screen that has all the letters to screen that has all the words that start with that letter. Now you have to specifically tell Android that, hey, I'm on this screen. I want to go from this screen to this other screen where I'll show all the words. You're explicitly telling Android that I want to go to this particular screen. This is an explicit intent. Now, if you think of cases where maybe you want to call someone, you type in a phone number, you click on call. Now you might have multiple apps on your phone that can let you call. You might have the default phone app. You might have apps like Truecaller. So there are multiple possibilities that the action that you want to take can be done in multiple ways. Similarly, you would have noticed that if you want to send someone a photo through email or some other messaging apps, you will get a list of apps shown to you that says that, hey, these are the apps that you have on your phone that can show images, right? So these are cases of implicit intent where you are not telling Android what exactly to launch. You're telling Android that I want something. I want an app. I want a screen where I can do this, where I can make a phone call, where I can click an image, bunch of things. So you tell Android, and what Android does is internally figures out what are the apps that can do that action you want to do. If you're calling someone, it looked at what are the apps that are capable of making a call, or what are the apps that are capable of taking a photograph, and then it will show you a list. So that's implicit and explicit intents. Just remember the words and the meaning of the words, and you will always remember the difference between explicit and implicit intents. Now, let's try adding an explicit intent to our app. Okay, so let's say we want to add two screens, one screen where we enter a friend's name and age, and another screen where we show the person's details. So here you see that we have something called main activity, and usually main activity is used to refer to the starting activity of a screen. You can name it anything you want. You could name it just something like happy birthday activity. Like you can just go ahead and do that. You can select main activity, right click, you go to refactor, rename, and you can call it birthday activity. This got changed. We'll also have to change the file name here. Oh, I think it didn't update correctly for me, but it actually got updated to birthday activity. Maybe some issue with Android Studio. So now if we run the app, it'll still do the same thing where it'll launch up Okay, I'll bring in my. I can make this not full screen, and then we should be able to see everything together. Yeah, it's building the app. Okay, while it continues to build the app, we can think of the other activity that we want to add to our app. So whenever you want to add an activity, you can go to your package, right click, new, and here you can add an activity. So if you remember, we used empty activity last time. Let's go ahead and do that as well. Now let's call this info activity where we want to enter information. Let it create an information. Let it create a default layout file of its own. We will make this a launcher activity. A launcher activity basically gives an icon on your launcher that this can be launched. Earlier, our birthday activity was the primary activity or app of our app. We will change that, and we will make this a launcher activity. The package name will remain the same, and we will use Kotlin. So Android Studio added this activity for us named info activity. And if you go to layout, you can see that there is an activity underscore info as well. Now, all of the activities that you create are registered in this file named Android manifest.xml inside the manifest directory. Let's open that up. Here you can see your info activity as well as your birthday activity. Now we don't want the birthday activity to be the main activity of our app. We want it to be a secondary screen. So we'll just remove this part, which says the intent filter, that this is one of the main activities. Okay, so we removed the birthday activity as main activity and we added this info activity. Let's try running the app to see if things are still running fine. Yeah. So the info activity that I created was a blank activity. So that is the one being launched in our app. Now let's go ahead and make some adjustments to the UI. OK, it's completely blank. So now we will need mainly two fields that let you input data and a button which directs you to the next screen. So you will remember from last time that we use something called a text view. Let's call it name text view. We give it an ID. It is asking us if we want to refactor. Yes, we want to refactor the ID. And let's call it friends name. OK, we'll also have to give it things like we'll have to tell Android how to actually connect this to the rest of the UI. So we will just give it the bounds for the left, right, and top, and we want it a bit lower. So we'll add maybe 24. No, let's make it 32. You'll remember that we did some of the things similarly in the last exercise as well. Now we have the friend's name, and we want something where the user can enter the name. So in this case, we will use something called an edit text. Let's see where I can find an edit text. OK, I think this will be the plain text. Yes. So I just took the plain text widget and I dragged it here. If you want to see the type, you can go to the code tab and you can see that this is an edit text. Let's go back to the design. Here we have a text by default. We can remove that. And we have a hint. So a hint is something that will just tell the user that this is the kind of data you can enter. but this won't be any sort of like pre-filled data. It's just to nudge the user to input some data. Let's keep this below this friend's name. We will keep this left and right. Let's add maybe something like 24 dB. So here, and let's add the hint as maybe Steve. Right, you can see that Steve comes in a very, I would say, faint texture because this is just a hint and not data. Right. Now we can add something similarly for age. So let's take a text view, paste it here. Make sure it's constrained properly. Okay, so we'll have to name this as age text view just for better reference next time. We will refactor this. Let's also rename the ID for this. We will call this name edit text. So similarly, we'll need another plain text field here. This won't be name, this will be age. So let's put a hint as maybe 23. We will name this as age edit text. We'll refactor this, and this will be named as friend's age. So we have these two headers with the friend's name and input field where we take the person's name, age, we take the age. Now here you will see that there are lots of different types of text fields. Right, there's plain text, there's password, there's email, there's phone number. Now the main difference between them is the type of data that you let the user input here. If you would have noticed when you sign up on different apps, if you go to the email field, automatically the @ symbol appears on your keyboard. If you have to enter a phone number, instead of showing your full keyboard, some apps show you just the number pad where you can enter a number. And depending on what you have to enter, the keyboard type changes. If you enter a password, your text fields are, I would say, hidden. So no matter what you type, you will just get asterisk. These are determined by the type of data you're entering. To show you an example, let's just drag in an email field here temporarily. If you go to the code tab here and come to the last email that the email input text that we dragged in, you'll see input type as text email address. This is what tells Android what kind of input you're going to give, and Android can figure out what kind of keyboard to show you. This could be something like text, password. So it would similarly start obfuscating. I mean, it'll start showing you star, star, star. If you say text autocomplete, you would get options to autocomplete on the top of your keyboard. Email address will automatically show you the @ symbol. So you can change the type of input you want from the edit text so that Android could show you the appropriate way of entering the data. Let's go back to our design. The final thing you will need is a button. So let's go ahead and get a button. Same thing that we will show. We will constrain this everywhere. Not everywhere, I mean, just position it. Let the top be 24. Now, this is a pretty small button, and this is the primary action of our app. So what we can do is we can expand it to the full screen. Let's go to the layout width attribute here, and here it says wrap content. So wrap content just tells Android that the width of my UI item should be only as much as to fit the content. Here the content is the text named button. I mean, is the text button. So it only takes up as much space as it needs for button and some padding around it. Now, if I were to change the text of this button to say something like hello world, you can see that the width of the button increased to make sure that the full text can fit inside. But for now, we'll just say wish over here. But we still want to expand it. what we can do is come to layout width and make it 0 dp. So what you technically end up telling Android is my button should start from the starting of the screen and go until the end of the screen, and it doesn't have a specified width. So Android just figures out that since it starts here and ends here, let's fill up the full space. But this doesn't look too good, so let's add some spacing to the front and the end. 24 looks good. Looks much better. From this, you can understand that wish is a button that's the primary action of this app. Now let's see how we can get these input data. Let's go to InfoActivity. Here you would have seen that we use something this view by ID to find view by ID to get access to the different views. We pass in the ID as well as we tell the type of the UI element. Android has something called view binding, which makes this a bit simpler. So to enable view binding, on this left side, you have two build.gradle files. One is for your entire project. That's the first one. And the second one is specific to the app that you're creating. Now, here app refers to one small module. When you are working on big apps, you can have multiple modules. So think of modules as a way of containing small parts of your app. Now, your maybe you have a login mechanism in your app that can become a module. You have a screen, like maybe think of Paytm. Paytm is a good example of an app that can have a lot of modules. A module can be for recharge, paying your gas bill, phone bills, booking movie tickets. So each of these can be a module. If you're making a small app, you'll mainly have just one module. As apps grow in size, the modules can grow in size. So the second build.gradle file is something specific to your module. If you come here, this is all the configuration for that particular module. Here, what we can do is add a new block named build features and enable this feature named view binding. Whenever you change anything in a Gradle file, you have to click on sync now so that Gradle knows what are the changes you have made and updates your project accordingly. Now we can go ahead and start using view binding. So what view binding does is it takes this XML file that you have and generates a corresponding Kotlin file. So let's see what the file will be. Since here it is activity main, so most likely the file name will be activity main binding. Now here we cannot create this binding instance instantly because we cannot initialize it like something with a constructor. We need to create this particular object. This won't work. So whenever we want to tell Kotlin that we are not giving a value to this variable right now, I will do it at a later point. You don't use val, you use late init var. So you are using a var because you're telling Android that this value will change in the future. And you're saying late init because you're not initializing it right now. You'll initialize it at a later point. Now, once you come inside on create, here you can start creating this instance. So it'll be activity view binding dot inflate, and you're passing something called a layout inflator. Don't worry much about this right now. And here where you're telling Android that for this activity, use this layout to set the view. We don't need to do it. Don't need to do this anymore. We can just use the binding instance and go to the root of the view. If we command or control click on root, you will see that it takes us to our XML file. And it starts highlighting, I mean, the cursor is at this constraint layout. So which is the root of our app. And inside the root app, we have some root of our view. And inside that inside that root view, we have small views. Now that we have used view binding, we can get rid of all of these find view by IDs. What we can instead do is, so I'm removing this access to happy birthday text view. Android is telling us that we don't have it initialized. I mean, we haven't defined this variable. So what we will do is binding dot. I'll forget the name of the layout. We used birthday message text view. So here we will use binding dot birthday message text view. And you can see that there are no more warnings and the app is fine. Similarly, we can start replacing other find view by IDs as well. This will become binding dot can drive button, and our app will still continue to function. So now we don't need to use find view by ID. We don't need to tell what kind of view it is, because view binding has a way of understanding what kind of views they are whenever you give the ID. So let's go back to our info activity. Let's do something similar here. Private latent var binding. Here the type would be according to the XML name, which is activity info. So this will be activity info binding. Sorry. Yeah. We can initialize binding here. And here we will use the binding dot root. Okay, now we need to get the data for our two fields, that is the age field as well as the name field. So let's get the name. Binding dot name edit text dot text dot toString. So you're getting the text from the edit text and converting it to a string. Similarly for age, let's get the age edit text dot text dot toString. And now we have these two items. We need a way of passing this to our birthday activity. So what we can do here is we'll create something called an intent. So we will use this intent constructor. We will tell that we want to go from this activity to another activity. So we will use this. This is a reference to the current context that you're in, or in this case, the current page you are in, which is the info activity. And we want to go to birthday activity. So we are specifying the .java extension so that it can go to that file. This is where you have created the intent. We use the start activity. We pass in the intent. So start activity uses this intent to figure out I have to start an activity from here to birthday activity. But we also need to pass in some data. So what you can do is intent dot put extra. And here you can give it something like name. So it's a key value pair. So whatever value you pass needs to have an associated unique key with it, which the next screen will use to get the data. I'll use the next key as age and I'll pass in the age. So I've passed in my data to this intent. Now my next page has to get the intent. So what it can do is I have intent. OK, so I am getting the extras from the intent that was used to launch this activity. I have to check if my extras is not equal to null, because it's possible that the previous activity did not give me any data, because while sitting in birthday activity, you won't know if the other activity is actually sending data to you or not. So you always have to do a null check to make sure that something was sent to you. What we will do is we will copy this code and go inside the null check here. OK, now we need to create this instance of a friend with the data we got. So let's change this to friend, and here we have to give the name and age. So let's get those data from our extras. Well, name equal to extras dot get string. So you have to, depending upon what kind of data the other activity might have passed to you, you would have to get string, get intent, get int. You have to call the corresponding methods to get the data. In this case, we are using string extra. Sorry, extra.get string, and we will use the same key that we had used in the earlier activity. We cannot use a different key, in which case Android won't be able to find the data that you want to get. We'll also give a default value. In case name wasn't given properly, we'll just call the person Steve. Similarly, we have to get the age. We had passed in the age also as a string. We will call this age. We will give a default value as maybe 3 years old. Okay, so we got the age, but it also has to be converted to an integer because that's how we are checking the ages. So you can call toInt. It will convert the string to an integer. Let's remove these values and let's use the data that was passed to us. Right? So here, instead of using Steve.age, we will use friend.age. And we have to figure out how to wish a friend. Now, earlier what we were doing is, if you go back to our root view here, we were hard coding this value saying happy birthday, Steve. Let's remove that because we will be dynamically setting it in a birthday activity. So what we do here is binding dot birthday message text view dot set text equal to happy birthday. And you'll remember from yesterday's session that whenever we want to print a value inside this string, what we do is dollar curly brackets friend dot name. Let's put some exclamation because you're excited to wish happy birthday. Here, wherever we're using Steve, let's just change it with dot name. Similarly here. Okay, let's get rid of this text. And I think we should be good to go. Let's launch the app. Okay, the app opened and a crash happened. The app stopped working, so it was a crash. Whenever you want to figure out how to debug a crash, you go to this small tab at the bottom of your screen called Logcat. You can see to do problems, statistic, terminal, Logcat. You might not see all the options that are on my screen. It depends upon how your Android Studio is configured, but Logcat will always be there. So let's open Logcat. Let's increase the size of this window and look at for something in red text. So here you can see that there was a fatal exception which caused our app to crash. And it said unable to start activity, number format exception for input string. Okay. So it says birthday activity is the one crashed at, but we never launched birthday activity. Let's see what's happening in InfoActivity. Okay. So what's happening here is that we are not waiting for the user to enter data, press the button, and then go to the next screen. We are trying to do all of this as soon as the screen is shown. So as soon as the screen is shown, we are trying to get the name and age and start birthday activity. But as soon as the app launches, you haven't input any data. So let's change this so that this block of code is executed only when the button is clicked. So button dot set on click listener. Let's verify if the button is the same button we are looking for. So we can click command or control click on button, and you can see it highlights the wish button. So that's fine. Let's copy this code, paste it inside the button. Let's run the app again. Awesome. Now the app is not crashing and it's actually waiting for us. So let's call my friend Sudarshan. And Sudarshan should be 21 years old. We can click on wish. And you can see that this message actually wishes Sudarshan and not Steve. The app name is still Steve because we haven't changed anything there. But the birthday message says happy birthday, Sudarshan. And let's check if Sudarshan can drive. Sudarshan can drive. Now, once you start an activity from another activity, you can even go back by pressing the back button. And now if you want to wish a different friend, uh, let's say Rajiv. Well, Rajiv is 17 years old. Let's wish Rajiv. Now you can see that we are wishing Rajiv, and can Rajiv drive? Rajiv can't drive because Rajiv is 17 years old. So you can see that we made this app very reusable now. And anytime you want to wish a friend, you can just open the app, edit the details of the friend, and wish them. You also learned how to go between two different screens, how to take input from the user and pass it to a different screen. And on the next screen, you're fetching that data. So right now, I would say good amount of Android to start creating these small apps where you can give some data, process the data, send it to a different screen, and do much more. Now let's take a look at so this was mainly about activities and using intents to go from one activity to another activity. Another very important topic to know about in Android is activity lifecycle. And okay, Google has some amazing diagrams to show you about activity lifecycle. So what exactly is a lifecycle? When you think of life cycles, it's basically how the cycle of life for a particular entity. Here it's showing a butterfly's life cycle, where first it's a caterpillar, then it's in a cocoon, then becomes a butterfly, and then the butterfly at some point dies. So it's like from the birth of the butterfly till its death, the full cycle of its lifetime. Similarly, activities also have a life cycle. You can see that there are arrows in this diagram. Let me just zoom into this if I can. Awesome. So here you will see that we start first from the initialized. From initialized, you go to a created state. From created, you go to started, then resumed. Then from resumed, to come back to started, created, and then destroyed. So you start from an initialized, then you go until destroyed. Now there are these different methods which are called by Android whenever these stages in the lifecycle changes. If you come to the next diagram, here you can see that we specify these methods along the arrows. So what are the methods that are called whenever this transition between different lifecycle phases happen? When it goes from initialized to created, it will call onCreate. If you go back to our app, you will notice that we are assigning binding values inside onCreate on both the activities. Because when the activity is just initialized, it does not have a view. So we cannot connect to any view and get data from it. We have to wait till it is created, then we'll get onCreate. So onCreate, we get to decide how it is created. Now, when it is being created, we are telling it that, hey, the activity is being created. This is the view that you should create the activity with. So that is why we initialize binding inside onCreate. Now, when it is starting, you have methods like onRestart and onStart. And then when it is resumed, it is onResume. Now, there is a difference between the started and resumed part. Now, there are scenarios where you have an app visible, but you're not actively using it. Or other cases would be you are interacting with the app is open, you're interacting with the app. Sometimes the app is open, but you're not interacting with it because there's something else on top. So, for example, you're using an app and suddenly you get a call. There might be a pop-up on your phone saying that, hey, you have a call. This is more important to you. It will bring focus into that call part. Or if you have sometimes on your phone, for example, if you're using WhatsApp, you might have something set up where as soon as the WhatsApp message comes, you have a pop-up that tells you that there's this WhatsApp message from this person. No, in those cases, your app doesn't have focus. It's the other app that's trying to take focus. A good example would also be Truecaller, that if you get a call from someone, Truecaller actually shows you a pop-up saying that it's trying to find the name of the person and whether it's a possible spam call or not. So in those cases, even though the app underneath that pop-up is visible, it doesn't have focus. So when it has focus, it's in the resume state. But when it is visible but not focus, it's in the started state. And then it can be in the stop state where it goes in the background. So you are using WhatsApp, you pressed your home button, WhatsApp into the background. It's a stop state. Now, if you remove WhatsApp from your recents, you're telling you that you no longer need to keep WhatsApp in memory. You can get rid of it. That is the destroyed state. Now, why are these steps important? Right. Now, think of cases where you want to run some operations, but it depends on whether the user is using the app or not. Now, think of an app like maybe ClickInfo, or an app where you follow the current score for the sport that you follow. Now, when you're looking at the app, it makes sense for the app to continuously update the data and show it to you on the screen that, hey, the last shot was a 4, the last shot was a 6, or maybe someone defeated someone in a set of tennis. Right? Those things would need to be continuously updated. Now, if you're not looking at the app and the app is in the background somewhere, there's no point of continuously updating all this data, because technically you'll just be wasting the user's battery as well as data by trying to do that. So you can use the lifecycle methods to figure out, is my app on the means on the user's screen, and are they interacting with it? If they are, then I'll update. Otherwise, I won't update. Uh, you can think of something like maps. Now, while you're using the maps, map will continue giving you navigation to go from here to there, take the next right turn, take the next left turn. But if you have cleared the maps app from your screen, you no longer want to use it. The maps app doesn't need to know your location anymore. So it can check if it has been destroyed. And once it's destroyed, it will stop looking for GPS updates. Because if it continues to do looking for GPS updates, it'll just wasting your battery by trying to continuously get GPS data, even though you don't need it for navigation anymore. So activity lifecycle is something that's very important to know when you're working on Android. And I would say getting activity lifecycle wrong can lead to a lot of these bugs that are difficult to understand, sometimes crashes, and a bunch of other things. So this was just about activities, how you can interact between them, and why the lifecycle stages of an activity are important. I think we finished the navigating between them. Later on, you can take your time and go to each of these code labs individually and see what are the most important aspects of it. Okay. The next thing you should be knowing about are fragments. Okay. So once you have your app has all these different screens, but all of your screens need not be activities. You can have, I would say, UI blocks that are not the full screen, but part of the screen. And these are called fragments. So you can think of fragments as reusable pieces of UI. Now, an activity can host multiple fragments. When you think of an activity as just one isolated unit, but activities can host fragments of its own, and it can host multiple fragments. Now, if you think of, again, your favorite movies app, you clicked on a movie and you want to see the details of the movie. On a phone, it's okay to open a new screen. But on a tablet, you don't need to. On a tablet, you have enough space to show the list of movies to the left and the details to the right. if you have used, I would say, the Gmail app or any email app on a tablet, you will notice that all the emails are shown on the left. And when you click on an email, the other email is shown on the right. Now, here, what's happening is you have two fragments. Here you have two fragments where fragments are these reusable pieces, and they can be distributed differently according to the device you're using. So you can have something like the master detail layout where you have one fragment to the left and one fragment to the right on the tablet. But when they become a phone, they become two different screens where you go from one screen to the other screen. Now, you can use fragments for a bunch of things to make it usable. So maybe you have, again, a movies app, and you can just browse the latest movies. And from the latest movies, you can add a watch list where you favorite some movies that you want to watch maybe on your weekend. So now, if you think of it, you have a list of movies. You can click on that movie list to go to the movie details. You can also go to your watch listed movies, click on it, and that will also open up the movie details. So you can see that this movie details part should be reusable because it's launched from multiple places and it's the same page that it's needed, just with different data. You can make that a fragment. Like here, they're using the example of the dialer app. And whenever you click on any of these buttons at the bottom, it'll just open up a new fragment each time. Here, they're using an example of a large screen and a small screen UI. This is the master detail layout I was talking about, where you have some sort of list on the left and some details on the right. And on the smaller screen, they can become separate pages as well. So what code labs do is give you a starting code, and they slowly walk you to different parts of the, I would say, exercise till you have a final code. So here they are giving you the link to the startup code. What you can do is you can clone it. You can use HTTPS clone as well. I'll open up a terminal. I'll do git clone, and I'll just clone this particular project. Okay, here they have a startup project and a main project, but I think they specify that you have to sort of folder name. Okay, they want you to use the activities. Okay, so here you have cloned this. Select the folder when you open. Okay. Mhm. Okay, so this happens with CodeLab sometimes where the CodeLab gets updated. I mean, the projects get updated after the CodeLab, so you might not always have the exact same thing. For example, here it mentions that there's a folder named this when you open the project, but I think let's look for the starter branch. Okay, so once we have the project clone, we can go to Android basics and we can check out to the starter branch. Sorry. And master, it's startup. Okay, let's go into Android Studio and open this project that we have gotten from them. So let's do open. Here you can browse all the projects that you have. I put it in a project folder, so it should be projects, Android basics, Kotlin, board app. It's taking some time to set up everything. So let's go back to the code lab and see what they want us to learn. Okay, So they're talking about the fragments lifecycle, which is similar to the activities lifecycle, but there are a few additions. So you have the initialize, create, started, resume, destroyed. Same thing, whatever you learned for activities. Now, for fragments, there are these extra methods, like for example, on create view, on view created. And in addition to on destroy, you have this on destroy view. So the way fragments are created is that you can have fragments without UI as well. So activities always need to have an UI, but fragments can be without UI. So what you can think of it as you have fragments, but you can attach views to fragments. So uh, there are different callback methods for when the fragment was created and when the fragments view was created and added to it. So that's the reason uh, fragments tend to have a bit more lifecycle methods. Let's see if our app is ready. Okay, this is the birthday app, which you can close for now. Where is the other? Okay, it's here. So I think it has finished syncing for most part of it. So let's try running it. And let's also take a look at the code. So Java, we have the package. Okay, so we have something called main activity. And we also have a detail activity. Okay, now again, the main activity here uses Viewbinding, so it uses activity main.inflate, and it uses something called a recyclerview. So a recyclerview is a way of showing a list of scrollable data to the user. Let's look at the app. So here you have a long list of scrollable data. This is done using recyclerviews. So why is it called a recyclerview? What happens is you can look at the A on the top and there's L at the bottom right now. When we scroll down, the data for all of the elements that are outside the screen or the views for those particular rows are not kept in memory. They are recycled and then used for the views which are coming into the screen. So if you scroll on completely and you use Z, right, it's possible that the view that was used for A, B, C, or whatever is being used for Z, X, Y, Z right now. Now, once we start scrolling down, all the views that are going outside the screen are actually being recollected by the memory and used to assign the views that are coming into the screen. So it's kind of recycling the views to make sure that your app is memory efficient. Otherwise, when you have such long lists, you'll have to create a lot of views, which is bad for memory. If you had a list of maybe 100 movies, you would need to have 100 views, which is very memory inefficient. Your app would lag and maybe crash after a point. But with this approach, at one point, you might just show like 10 movies. So it would have to create maybe 10, 11 such views in memory instead of having to create 100. Or Recyclerview has a layout manager which tells it how to lay it out. Is it vertical? Is it horizontal? And then there's an adapter. Adapter tells Recyclerview how many items are there and how should each item look. So you have this linear layout manager, which says that I want to display my data linearly. You can also have something like, for example, grid layout manager. And it needs to know the number of columns that you want to have. So I made it a grid layout manager with 2 columns, and you should see that. Yeah, now you have 2 columns, which goes A, B, C, D, as in like if you can change it to 3, you will have 3 columns. So just the layout manager just tells how the items in the list should be laid out. If you do linear, it will just be in like one after the other. If it's grid, it will start making a table sort of a thing. Now, if we see linear layout manager, let's just go to its definition by going command or control click. You can see that internally it calls an orientation saying default orientation. If you go to its definition by command or control clicking, I think it'll just tell us that it's a vertical by default. We can come here, pass in a next parameter, which says recyclerview dot horizontal. Okay, it also needs a third parameter, which is supposed to be, should it reverse the layout or not? We don't want it to be reversed. Let's try running the code, and I think this time we will see a horizontal recycler view. Yeah, you can see that everything is horizontal. So that's what the layout manager does. Let's take a quick look at the adapter as well. So we have a letter adapter. Here, if you remember yesterday, we learned about ranges depending upon which session you attended. Like I would say the first session, if you have attended, you remember we learned about ranges where you can give the starting and ending value and it will create a range. So we are creating a range similarly here. We were saying that go create a range from A to Z. And Kotlin figured out that, okay, I have to go from A to Z. So A, B, C, D, E, F till Z. And it used to list. So it converted the range to a list, similar to what you think of as an array. There are small differences, but you can think, if you know about arrays in just general programming, it's just like a collection of values. We have this thing called a view holder, which tells how each row in the list should look like. So this view holder is actually created from this method called onCreateViewHolder, where we're inflating this one layout. So let's take a look at the layout by command or control clicking. And you can see that this is a view. And this is the same view that is repeated for every item in the list. And there is a place where you connect the data to this view. So every time it will just create the same view to show for A to Z. But then you also specify that, this position as A, this position is B. So if it's the fourth row, it should have B. This is what you do inside this onBind view holder. It tells you the position that Android wants to know that what should I do at this position. What you do inside is you get the particular character from the list. So if it's position 0, you get A. If it's position 1, you get B similarly. So you get position 25, you'll get Z. So you get the item. You call button.text and you put that item inside the text view. We've already learned how we set text on different text views. This is the same thing that we do here. And this is just a general recycler view adapter. The word adapter is also something similar. It just instead of showing letters, it shows words for those different letters. Now, it's asking us to create a fragment saying letter list fragment with a particular layout. And what is this supposed to do? Okay, so what it's asking us to do is move from activities to fragments. So whatever we have in the detail activity, it just wants us to start showing it as a fragment. Okay, let's create the fragment then. So it's very similar to how we had created activities. So new, instead of choosing activity, you can choose fragment. And it has different types of fragments. So let's see the one that they want us to create. They're saying that create a blank fragment. So let's go to fragment blank. Let's name it word list. Okay. It has just a pre-filled the fragment with a bunch of data. We can ignore that for now. You can see that some of the screens look different from what you saw. That's because these code labs maybe were created with the previous version of Android Studio, and the studio has updated, so things look a bit different. So what they are doing is they have cleared out the rest of. Okay, they've cleared out the code, so we can do that as well. Let's just clear out this entire code. So the way you create a fragment is class. word list fragment, and you have to extend from the fragment class. You have kind of created a very simple fragment. Now they want us to create two fragments. So one is the letter list fragment, one is a word list fragment. So let's do that as well. New fragment, line fragment. Again, we can just get rid of this entire code. Letter list fragment. Since this is a fragment, this also has to extend from fragment, and we call the constructor. Okay. So next, they're just telling us what is the layout supposed to be. So you just copy paste the layouts from here. That is on the fragment letter list. So fragment letter list. We can go to the code whenever code tab, whenever we want to just paste code or just type in code. So it's just that. Similarly for word list fragment. When creating fragments, a lot of things would be just copy paste since basic structure remains the same. So that's why I'm just skipping through these parts quickly. Now they want us to start adding the code for that particular fragment. Let's see what are the things that they're trying to do. Okay, so what they want us to do is for the letter list fragment, they want us to create the view binding methods. Let's see if view binding is enabled. Sorry, not this one, this one. Yes, view binding is enabled. Okay, so view binding is enabled here. What we can do is do something similar to what we did. Binding, fragment, letter list binding. Now here what they are asking us to do is create this nullable binding. So if you remember, I mentioned that a fragment can exist with a view and without a view. So it's possible that sometimes when you're accessing a fragment, you don't have a view with it. So we'd have to make it a nullable that there are cases where this might not have. So, and since you're giving it a value, we can remove the late init part here. And we don't want anyone else accessing this. So as a convention, we're making it an underscore just to say that this is some sort of an internal parameter, we're not supposed to use it much. And later what they're doing is they're exposing that as a method. So since this was a nullable, they are giving you access to this underscore binding as a different variable named binding, and they're removing the underscore. And whenever you call binding, it uses this get method to tell that whenever someone wants binding, it will internally call this code. And this double exclamation mark that you see, it's called a force unwrap. So it's when some value is giving you a possibly null value, but you're sure it won't be null. So you're saying that, okay, I believe this won't be null. So don't give me a nullable value, but give me the direct value. Then they're asking for an onCreate method and says that this has some option menus. Okay, so let's paste that here as well. So onCreate, if you remember, is when this was created, but it hasn't had a view yet or a view attached to it yet. What this does is set has options menu. It tells Android that I might have some sort of a menu on my particular screen, which is like if you notice that some apps have these three dots at the top right corner where if you click on it, it has an overflow menu. So this is what happens here. Next, they call the onCreate view, which is to create the view that will be attached to your UI. Let's add this here as well. Here, you're initializing underscore binding, similar to what you did for activities, where you get the item you call inflator. For fragments, since fragments can be attached to activities, they can have their own views. There are a few more parameters. You don't need to bother about them right now, like these three parameters. We'll mostly be copy pasting the same things, only have very specific different use cases. we get the root of the binding similar to what we did in an activity, and then we return this. So we are telling Fragment that, hey, this is the view you're supposed to attach to yourself. You can see a slight warning from Android Studio that this is only being used to return a value and can be inlined. So you can just go to this bulb, click inline variable. What this did is it just replaced a value because we are storing this in this variable and then returning this. So we might as well just do it directly. So it's returning the root element. Then it's creating a late initialized recycler view. If you remember what I told you about activities is that you cannot initialize these views right away because it takes some time for the activity to be created and get its view. Similarly, on fragments, you have to wait till the fragment has had its UI attached to it, and only then you can get access to your items. On view created is the method that is called when the view has been created for the the view has been created for the fragment, and once the view has been created, we can start accessing items inside the view. So we wanted the view inside, we wanted the recycler view inside this layout. So that's what we are doing here is we are calling binding.recycler view and storing it in a different variable named recycler view. There's this choose layout method which hasn't been defined yet, and that's why it's said. They'll mostly, I think, define in the next step. Okay, they also have the onDestroy method. I'll explain that as well. So if you remember that we created this on create view method where we told the fragment that this is the view you're supposed to use, and this is the root of the fragment that you're using. Now, when the view is being destroyed, we also have to let go of the value from underscore binding. Because if the underscore binding value holds on to the view after the fragment has been destroyed, it is just taking up space in memory, which is bad. Since a fragment has been destroyed, we no longer need to store some sort of access to the view. So it does underscore binding equal to null. So it clears that value. Okay, here they have defined the choose layout function which we need. Let's just copy and paste it here. Let's see what's going on. What's going on here? So they have a when condition. A when condition is similar to a switch condition in Java, where you give some sort of a value and you use a lot of different conditions to compare it with. So here it's checking if is linear layout manager, that's the value to be compared. And then the possible comparisons are true and false. So if it is true, we are setting the layout manager for this recycler view to a linear layout manager. You can click on Alt and Enter, and this will import the file for you. So what this wants to do is, if it's linear layout manager, use a linear layout manager or use a grid layout manager. They also have this on create options menu. So let's add that as well. They seem to be missing some files here which they haven't specified. Okay, we'll take a look at them soon. So what onCreate option menu does is, excuse me, it tells Android that these are the options you're supposed to show in my menu. So whenever you go to the three dots in the top corner, you expand it, and then you use that to show different menu items. We added the choose layout, and there are these two other methods here as well. We will copy them and see what's happening here. Okay, so I think we can ignore the set icon method for much of the detail. They just want to decide what icon is supposed to be set to a menu item. And similarly, it's again checking if it's a linear layout manager, it will put it as a drawable IC grid layout. If it is not, it'll choose IC linear layout. And drawables, if you remember from yesterday, are I would say resources that can be used to show an image. Last time we added an image ourselves. Here, it's using different sort of icons to add them. And on options item selected is a callback method, which is called whenever you're selecting a menu item from that three dot menu. So whenever you click on the three dots and the menu shows up, you click on an item. This is the method that's called. Inside that, you can check which menu item was selected, and based on that, you can do different actions. Okay, and then just finally copy over the is linear layout manager property from main activity. Put this right below the declaration of recyclerview property. So they're asking us to just go to the main activity. That's where it never had. Let's check if we copied the wrong directory. So we're using the startup project, but rather there's activities. So if does this particular branch have the code that we need? Interesting. So that this has all the files. Okay. So looks like I copied the wrong branch. Let me open up a terminal and fix that. Okay, that's fixed. I shouldn't have reset that. Okay, never mind. Okay, let's run this branch of the app and see what's going on. The basic structure is still the same. We have a detail activity, we have a letter adapter, the main activity, and the word adapter. Let's run this on the emulator and see if the UI is supposed to be different. And while this runs, I can quickly create the fragments that I had to create again. Okay, so the app is ready on the emulator. Okay, so if you click on this menu item, it changes between a linear layout adapter and a grid layout adapter. This is what the activities do, but we want to move them to fragments. Okay, so this is what the code lab wanted us to do. Let's just quickly repeat the steps that we had done earlier, where we called it this. We gave it a fragment. This was the letter list. I think the word list we did something similar. Most of the things will remain the same. So let's just copy over whatever we did from the activities to the fragment. So where we had the letter list fragment, that has to be copied from the main fragment. So we can copy over this part where we just keep access to a recycler view. And this is the value that we were using in different places to figure out whether you should use a linear layout manager or a grid layout manager. We can copy over most of this file pretty quickly. This is the steps we've already done once, so I'm not repeating them again. I'm just copy pasting whatever we copy pasted earlier. We've already copied this. This is on destroy view where we clear the reference to the views. On create options menu tells us what are the options that are supposed to be shown on the menu. Okay, so let's just import everything. What I'm doing is I'm just using, if you're on Mac, Option Enter, or you can use an Alt Enter to get all the imports done. Okay, we are missing recyclerview. That's because we haven't copied over the layouts. So what we can do is from activity main, we can just go copy over this one to fragment letter list. I think our letter list fragment. Oops, I copied everything wrong. This is fragment letter list. Okay, so what we can just do is whatever I should have pasted in letter list fragment, I accidentally placed in word list. So I'm just copying and taking it over to letter list. Letter list is done. So our letter list fragment is basically whatever we were seeing on the main activity here. So we just copied whatever was in main activity, putting letter list fragment. Now my main activity doesn't need to do anything. So I can get rid of most of the values from here. That's what the codelab says as well, that remove everything, and this should be the only data that remains in your main activity. Let's get rid of all this. And I think we followed it pretty well, where it says only this should remain in my main activity. So main activity is done. My letter list fragment is done as well. So let's close all of this. Now we just need to copy everything from detail to word list fragment. So let's go to detail activity underscore detail, code tab, copy what we had to. Put in the word list fragment is fragment word list. We pasted everything here. And similarly, I think we can just go to detail activity. On create, let's say what they ask us to do here. Yeah, they said copy over the companion object from detail activity to word list fragment, make sure the references is updated. On create view, elements get a reference. Okay, so first thing, let's copy the companion object. Companion objects are similar to what you have static in Java, where you don't need an instance of the class to get access to these different values. You can just use the class name and directly get access to these values. And the important part about these are that any two, I would say any two entities asking for this particular value will get the same data always. Let's copy that over to word list fragment. Some things with fragments are pretty similar. So for example, on create view, I can just copy this here. Here we don't really need the same binding, but we can copy it and change the types. So you can come here. Here we want to use the fragment underscore letter underscore word underscore list. So instead of fragment letter list binding, it will be fragment word list binding. We'll just replace the same thing here. We follow what Studio is asking us to do, inline the variable. Awesome. So we have copied setting the view and everything, and they said that whatever is remaining should go in on view created. So let's just copy this part. We don't need anything else from detail activity. We are overriding the on view created method, and we can just paste everything that we need here. Awesome. We also need to copy the on destroy view, which was somewhere here. Now, all of these, wherever it needs a context, with activity, you always have a context, but with fragments, you have a nullable context. So the fragment might not be attached to something. It might not have a UI. In these cases, you never know. But just to bypass this, you can write require context, which will make sure that you have a context. If it doesn't, it will crash. You don't have an intent when you're coming from, I would say, one fragment to another fragment. You have intents when you're coming from activities. So in this case, this would become arguments, required context. This should be a method call. There's a title here. Let's figure out where the title was coming from in detail activity. What was title doing here? Okay, that was the activity title. Have they mentioned anything about title? Okay, it says activity.intent. So let's arguments make it. Okay. They have given us a detailed walkthrough of whatever happens. We created the on create view by using the fragment word list binding. Inside on activity created, we set up the recycler view, which we are doing it here. We are calling the on destroy method correctly. We can now delete the code. We have deleted the code, remove detail activity. So asking us to finally remove detail activity. Okay, cool. Intent. Okay, so they're telling us whenever we go to the letter list fragment, inside letter adapter. Okay, they said that we are using, okay, yeah. Here we are creating an instance. The instructions are that replace detail activity.letter with word fragment.letter. Word list fragment, that's fine. That's because we removed the companion object from detail activity to word list fragment. Similarly, in word adapter, you need to update the unclick listener where you navigate to the search results for the word replacing search prefix. Okay, this is in word list adapter. So if you go to word adapter, yeah, the search prefix is now in word list fragments. So this will get access from there. We have already done everything. Let's see if detail activity is being called by anyone. It's called by the Okay, they're asking us to remove detail activity. So what is fragment? So we can get rid of detail activity since we won't be showing any details there. What we can do is delete it anyway. And if you remember, the manifest is the one that holds access to different activities. And since we have removed detail activity, we can remove it from the manifest too. Okay, so we have followed whatever they have said here. We removed it from the manifest as well. Next is when we will come with something called Jetpack navigation component. So Jetpack navigation component is some sort of a library that lets you figure out how to navigate between different sorts of fragments. It makes it easy because it creates a graph, and from the graph, it figures out how to go to different fragments. Instead of you jumping from one fragment to the other fragment, it's very difficult to figure out which fragments are connected. But if you think of a graph, you know that you can go from one point to the other point only if they're connected. So this helps you visualize the navigation that the entire app can follow. It's really useful for the developers to figure out that how screens are connected and how data flows between different fragments. First, they want you to enable some variables inside the build.gradle file, which is at the project level. If you remember, I told you there are two there are two build.gradle files. One is at the project level and one is at the app module. This has to go inside the project level one, which is the first one. You can see there's already an ext block which has some values. So it has still material version. Let's figure out what are the. So we have to just add the navigation version. Let's do that. This just makes it easy for us to reuse these variables. We are not doing sync now yet because we haven't added our libraries. Let's go here. These are the two libraries you have to add. One is for the navigation UI as well as one for the fragment navigation. So they are developed as separate libraries, which makes it easy for them to make changes. So most of your dependencies will go into the module level. And since we have only one module named app module, we'll go to that builder tool. You can see there's already a bunch of dependencies here. These are mostly libraries. We will just add two more. You can see we're using the nav version variable here, which is the same one that's being defined in the other file. And instead of having to write 2.3.1 multiple times there, we just wrote it as a shareable value here. Let's see what are the dependencies we will need. So we will need something called navigation safe args Gradle plugin. Whenever you're adding a plugin, that goes at the project level. So you would come to the dependencies block at the project level and add it here. Again, you will see that we are using nav version, which is the one defined here. Now that you have defined these plugin, you will also have to enable it. And plugin you can enable on a module by module basis. So we will go to our module and we will enable it for this module. Because in some cases you want the module to be enabled, so you want the plugin to be enabled for a few modules and not the entire project. And modules can have, and plugins can have a lot of varied effects. They can change your code. They can change how your code is compiled in different ways. They can do a bunch of things, and sometimes they can slow down your app compilation as well. So it's not always a good idea to keep plugins enabled throughout the project. It's better to usually just do it at the module level. Okay, so next, we need to start defining the graph and also a container in which we will start creating fragments. Okay, so let's add the container first. Now, since fragments are hosted on an activity, the activity needs some sort of container where it can keep hosting these different fragments one after the other. Let's go to our, we don't need the activity underscore detail, so we can get rid of that as well. Yeah, let's go to activity underscore main. And here we were just using a recycler view initially because our activity was showing the list. Let's replace that with something called a fragment container view. The fragment container view is a container view that can load fragments inside it one after the other. If we go back to the thing, they're adding us that we have to add a name attribute, which refers to this class. We have to add default nav host true, and then something called a nav graph. Okay, so this particular line will tell Android that this container will act as a host for all my fragments. This will tell that this is the default host to be used inside this activity for all fragments. And nav graph is just a reference to a file which will contain all the information about a graph. We will create this file shortly. Let's go ahead and add this attribute. Next, this one. You will see that app is in red because app is not defined here, only Android is defined. If you see Android here, Android is defined here with this schema, but we don't have a definition for app. So similarly, you can do Option or Alt Enter, and you can see now app is also defined with this particular other schema. Okay, here the nav graph is in red because we haven't created the navigation graph yet. So what you can do is go to resources, right click, new resource directory. And here you will have to choose the resource type as navigation. This will also change the directory name to navigation. And now you have a new folder named navigation. This will host this nav graph file that is missing. So let's go here, new navigation resource file, navgraph.xml, enter, and it has created a navigation graph for you. If you go to the split view, you have a navigation which is still empty. We will start adding the different parts of the navigation now. Okay, so they want you to start adding different fragments. Let's go ahead and do that. They're using the design view here. So add a fragment. It will just search for all the fragments that you have in your app and show them one after the other. So you have the letter list fragment. And then you have the word list fragment. You can go to the code to see what's happening here. We have defined two fragment XML tags, which has the package name as well as the name of the file, which we had created earlier, and I've just given them labels. IDs are the ones that they will refer to. You will see how it works very soon. Let's go back to our design view. Okay. Now you have to find an action to connect these two fragments to say that it's possible to go from this fragment to the other fragment. And this is where your graph starts forming. Let's say from letter, you can go to activity. You can see that there's this line. This is called an action. This action also has an ID, says action letter list fragment. Let's see if I can expand this. Action letter list fragment to word list fragment. The destination is the word list fragment, and this ID is the same as the ID given earlier. So if you go to code, you can see that this action letter list fragment is the ID of this fragment to word list fragment, which is the ID of this other fragment. Now we also need to pass in the letter that was selected in the letter list fragment, go to the word list fragment. You can click here, which will give you a new add argument dialog. Here they want you to use the argument name as letter, which you pass in a string. Since it's A, B, C, D, you can use a string here. Call it letter, type would be string. You can add it. So this action now also takes in a value. So whenever you're calling word list fragment from letter list fragment, you have to pass in a letter. Now this is setting the start destination. This will let the container figure out that when it goes to a graph, what should be the starting destination. You can skip this step because if you come here, you will notice that there's a home button next to it. So letter list fragment is already the starting fragment. Now you have used all of these different XML, all of these libraries, and you have made this graph. Now what you need to do is click on build. What build will do is it will use all the steps that you have done right now to generate some data for you. So generate some code for you. So it'll generate code which will let you go from letter list fragment to word list fragment. You won't have to do it manually. You have defined it in XML. There's some classes in the library that will read the data from this XML and it will start creating files for you. It says that detail activity is missing, so it can't finish building. We will fix that later. Now, earlier we were using intents to go from activity to activity, but now we are going fragment to fragment. So we will make use of the action that we just created. Let's just copy this part. Inside the letter adapter, we had that whenever any row was clicked for the letter, we were creating an intent, passing an extra with the I would say with the letter of that particular row and starting a new screen. Like if I clicked on A, it would start letters that started with A. If I click G, it would start. So this is starting an intent. What we will be doing right now is instead of creating an intent, let's get rid of all of this. So we say that letter list fragment direction. So this class is also generated by the library for us. So if you click on this, it takes us to the XML to show that these are connected. Where were we? Oops, letter adapter. Yeah. So we get the directions, and the directions had this one action. Again, if you remember that this is the same action name we saw earlier, it's just that the underscore was replaced and it just became one word. Action letter list fragment to word list fragment. It was supposed to take a letter argument, and we just passed in the letter that is for that particular row. So this created the action for us. Next, we will need to launch the action. Let's see how to do that. It's calling this method called a find nav controller and then using this action to navigate. So when we were starting to use intents, we were using, let's import this. We were using start activity along with the intent to start the activity. When you are using these navigation actions, you use a navigation controller and then you tell the navigation controller to use this action. From the action, it figures out which fragment is supposed to start from, which fragment it's supposed to go to, and what data is supposed to be passed. Now you have finished coding the part where you would go from one fragment to the other fragment. Now you need to tell your activity how to actually start hosting these fragments. If we go back to our main activity, it doesn't do anything right now. It just launches an activity and shows a view. We need to tell the activity how do you connect the fragment container with the fragments to be shown, etc. There isn't much here. So it's creating a late initialized nav controller instance. If you remember earlier, whatever we cannot initialize right away, we use late in it. Here, we are using the fragment by ID. This is the ID we had given to a fragment container. And we are saying that this will be a navigation host fragment. And we are getting the controller from the navigation host and storing it as a variable. Next, it says set up action bar with nav controller. What this does is it figures out how to change your toolbar along with the navigation. What this will do is, for example, you go from one activity to the other activity, it'll automatically add things like a back button to your toolbar so that if you click the back button, it's supposed to come back to the previous page. This method handles all of that for you. And one method just to tell that does our navigation support going up? So when you press the back button, you're going one layer up. And this should be good. Now our app should build. There's one more small change to make, which we will do next, is right now we figured out a way of using action to send data from our word list, letter list fragment. We have passed out the data, but inside the word list fragment, we haven't figured out a way of getting the data. Because if we go to word list fragment, we're still using intents here, but we have stopped using intents right now. So that's the last piece of the puzzle. We are using activity intent. We don't need to do that. Rather, we can use arguments. So what arguments are similar to whatever extras you're giving in our intents. They work the similar way. Instead, since you don't use intents to launch fragments, you pass in arguments. And inside the fragments, you can get access to these arguments. I think that should be good for us. Let's try running it and see if it works. If it crashes, we can again debug like before and figure out how to fix the thing. It has finished. Let's see. We are using fragments. It's letter list fragment. It's still working good. And it's working as expected. We clicked on G, it opened up G, and you can see that we have these different different names that are showing up for the lists. If you just remember that letter list fragment, word list fragment, the strings we saw in a nav graph. So here, these are the labels we had used. Now we can, let's just put some spaces in here. Let's see if it gets reflected. Looks much better. Instead of using one, I would say single string which had all the words, we have added space and things look much better. We can scroll down, click on Z, we get Z. So yeah, now you know how to use both activities and fragments, how you can communicate between different fragments, how to create a navigation graph, uh, use the generated code for actions to go from one fragment to another, and also on the second fragments, how to get data. Update label fragments is something you already did, so we can skip that. We don't need the solution code because we went through the entire thing and the app is working perfectly. Now you know how to navigate between different screens and how you can use a navigation component as well. I think we initially did plan on covering uh, access to internet in this session, but we are already 2 hours in, so maybe we could do that in the next session where we connect to an API endpoint. So what you do with connection to the internet is you need to load some data from the internet into your app. What we will do is we will look for a particular API that gives us access to some sort of data. We will fetch the data from that particular API. We will convert it into Kotlin code on our app and use it to update a UI. So connect to an API, get data, update a UI. And also you will learn not just how to get data from the internet, but also how you can load images from the internet. Again, going back to your movies app. A movie app would be very boring if you didn't show the posters of the movie. So how do you exactly use, I would say, images from the internet to show them on your app? What you saw in the previous session was we downloaded an image, put it in the app, and then we loaded it up. But you can't do that for a lot of images, right? Like you can't keep downloading posters of hundreds of movies, put them in your app. Your app will become few hundred MBs big. And every time a new movie is added, you will have to keep adding the same files to your particular app as well, which is not a good way of doing things. So how do you load images from URLs on the internet? How you can cache them as well. So if you really, really like the Avengers Endgame movie, and you keep opening the details for that movie a lot of times, it wouldn't make sense to load that image from the internet every time. What you could do is you could store it locally. And next time, whenever you want to see the poster, your app fetches it from the local copy instead of having to hit the internet image again. This saves you a lot of data, and it's a more efficient way of doing things. So next session, we will first learn about connecting to the internet and using the REST APIs, and also how you can store sub data on your device. Right now, we are using very small amount of data, like for example, the word list, a small amount of data. But what if, again, coming back to the movie app, what if you have all these different movies and you have your favorite movies whose details you want to store on your app offline? So if you want to quickly look up who are the actors or the names of the actors in the Avengers Endgame movie, you and you don't have internet, you can still load up the app. And since it's your favorite movie, you have it saved on the app. So you can see what are the who are the actors in their movie. Similar like a note-taking app. If you have notes in your app, you shouldn't really need internet to access them, right? These are just notes. So you can have them on your device, and whenever you want, you can just see them. So next session, we will learn about interacting with both the internet and how you can store data locally.
Thank you so much, Mr. Subhrajyoti, sir, for this enlightening session and for conveying everyone with great knowledge on Android and Kotlin. I really hope that everyone who came today enjoyed the session and learned something new. And let me tell you, the third session for Android Study Jams will be conducted on 20th December, so save the date. Until then, I wish you a great time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.